It was really nice to have a few days off. It is really, really nice to be back. I keep running into old friends and family members and people on the street and people like, out on the dog walk and stuff. And people want to talk to me about politics. They say, with concern in their eyes, how are you feeling about 2017? And I found myself by the end of my vacation saying, I'm really excited for 2017. I am. My job is to explain stuff. And oh my God, is that a good job to have this year already? Case in point. This story is amazing. And it starts with copper, the mineral, copper. There's copper in brass. There's copper in bronze. The Statue of Liberty is sheathed in a layer of copper. That's about the thickness of 2 pennies. Pennies themselves used to be copper, but now they're just copper-covered zinc, which sort of seems sad. But it makes financial sense because copper, over time, became too valuable to use in something as cheap as a penny. Because most of what we use copper for now is conducting electricity. We use copper for wiring. There is a massive global appetite for copper. And the world's largest producer of copper is an American company. It's a company that used to be based in New Orleans, but now the mining company Freeport, it's based in Phoenix, Arizona. And the Freeport Mining Company of Phoenix, Arizona, they do still mine copper in Arizona, and they mine copper in New Mexico and in Colorado. But they are a gigantic firm, and they're a global operation. In South America, they mine copper in Chile and in Peru. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, they mine copper and also cobalt. In Indonesia, they operate the largest gold mine in the entire world, which is also the 3rd largest copper mine in the world, which is also a huge silver mine as well. This is an American company, but the physical footprint that Freeport has in Indonesia, it isn't just visible from space, it's easily visible from space. It's massive. Their mine in Grasberg, which is in Papua province in Indonesia, it's basically a massive upside-down mountain. It is almost 500,000 acres. They first discovered mineral wealth there in the 1930s when it was a Dutch colony. By the 1970s, Indonesia was an independent country, and that mine at Grasberg was one of the biggest open pits in the world. Among the many products and byproducts of that mine are, of course, all that silver and copper and gold. Also, hundreds of millions of tons of mining waste that they have dumped in the surrounding jungle and rivers, that environmental damage associated with that giant mine. It's one of the things that mine is most famous for around the globe. But it is also just unappreciably massive, both geologically and economically. That operation, Freeport's operation in Indonesia, is so big that in Indonesia, that company is the single biggest taxpayer for the whole country. And it's not like Indonesia is some rinky-dink country, right? Indonesia has 260 million people. The biggest countries on Earth by population are China first, then India, then us, then Indonesia. Indonesia is ginormous, but of all the 260 million people in Indonesia, its biggest tax payment every year comes from Arizona. It comes from this American company. It's just huge. In our presidential election this past year, do you remember when Indonesia had a weird little cameo role? It was in the Republican primary. It came up, it was so strange, so unexpected, so not just inexplicable, but unexplained at the time and until now. It didn't ever make sense until now. And I love it when a story, doesn't make sense for a year. And then all of a sudden it does. It rarely happens when you get it so clearly, light dawns on Marblehead. Oh, that's why that happened. But in this case, light dawns on Marblehead. Now we get it. It started off very strangely and with no explanation. It was last September 2015. So that was just a few months into the start of the Republican primary. The Donald Trump candidacy had started in June of 2015, and it was almost honestly treated as a joke from the beginning. I mean, his supporters can crow about that now, and they do, but at the time, it was treated mostly as a joke. And there were some funny things, some laughable things about the launch of the Trump candidacy, up to and including reports that the candidate had to hire extras. He literally had to pay actors to pretend to be his supporters at his day one announcement at Trump Tower. But however soft and even silly his candidacy seemed at the very start, it caught fire for real very quickly. So much so that by the fall of 2015, the Republican Party was already worrying openly about Donald Trump's poll numbers. He was definitely leading. And they were worried that even if one of their more normal candidates could beat Trump to get the nomination, they were worried that he was showing such support in the polls, maybe he might bolt the Republican Party and run as a third party, an independent candidate, against whoever the Republican nominee was. And so in the fall of 2015, this was a real worry, real concern. Moderators at the debates, and then ultimately the party itself, they started asking all the Republican candidates to make a pledge, to pledge that they would support whoever the party ended up nominating. And there was a little question as to whether the other candidates would really pledge to definitely do that, because there was a chance that Donald Trump might become the nominee, and would they all be comfortable making that pledge? There was a little question about that, but mostly the Republicans were worried about Trump himself. Would Trump make a pledge like that? Would he really pledge not just to not run as an independent, but to wholeheartedly support whoever the Republican nominee was, even if it was somebody like low-energy Jeb Bush or Lion Ted or Little Marco? I mean, the Republican Party was very worried about that, because initially the answer from Trump was that he would make no such pledge.
Is there anyone on stage, and can I see hands, who is unwilling tonight to pledge your support to the eventual nominee of the Republican Party and pledge to not run an independent campaign against that person? Again, we're looking for you to raise your hand now. Raise your hand now if you won't make that pledge tonight. Mr. Trump. So, Mr. Trump, to be clear, you're standing on a Republican primary debate.
I fully understand.
The place where the RNC will give the nominee the nod.
I fully understand.
Just to be clear, you can't make it. We're going to move on. You're not going to make the pledge tonight.
I will not make the pledge at this time.
Okay. All right.
That was August 2015. Right? Major point of contention in the Republican Party. Major point of contention at the Republican debates. Lots and lots of drama around that issue. All the other candidates say, yeah, I'll make the pledge. But Donald Trump, for a long time, would not. And that is why it was genuinely a big deal. It was the resolution to something around which there was a lot of tension. It was a big deal when on September 3rd, Donald Trump changed tack, finally announced that, yes, he would sign this pledge.
I have signed the pledge. So I will be totally pledging my allegiance to the Republican Party and the conservative principles for which it stands, and we will go out and we will fight hard and we will win.
He signed it. He signed the pledge. I have signed the pledge. This sort of feels like a silly turn in the campaign now, looking back at it, but at the time it was a big deal in the Republican primary. And there were two things that were weird about it when it happened. The first one was when he held up that piece of paper, everybody could see that the date on it was wrong. It was September 3rd, not August 3rd. So that was kind of weird. The date was wrong. The second thing that was strange was, hey, what's this random Indonesian guy doing there for this announcement? It was such a weird moment at the time, and it really made no sense until now. We are having one of those moments when now something that previously made no sense makes sense. So watch this. This is what happened that day. This is how Donald Trump, he wrapped up and then restarted his press conference about signing that silly Republican pledge. It was so weird at the time. Watch.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is an amazing man. He is, as you know, right? Speaker of the House of Indonesia, he's here to see me. SETNOV, one of the most powerful men and a great man, and his whole group is here to see me today, and we will do great things for the United States. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do they like me in Indonesia?
Yes, I like. Thank you very much.
Speaker of the House in Indonesia, thank you very much.
That was such a random moment in the presidential election, right? Such a random moment in the Republican primary. Press conference is over. He convenes his press conference to announce that he signed this pledge, holds up the pledge with the wrong date on it, does a press conference about that, ends the press conference, thanks everybody, walks away, then comes back to the podium, starts up the press conference again to tell everybody how awesome it is that he's meeting with his friend, the Speaker of the House of Indonesia. His whole group is here to see me today. We will do great things for the United States, won't we? It was weird at the time, totally inexplicable. Well, now we get it. Because that was last September 2015. Donald Trump was doing Donald Trump business that day. His presidential campaign was only a few months old. The Indonesian Speaker of the House was there meeting with him at Trump Tower that day to talk about Trump's business dealings in Indonesia, a planned golf course and a planned hotel. Since then, that guy, the Indonesian Speaker of the House, has gotten into and out of a lot of trouble. Because that company I was talking about, that's the largest taxpayer in Indonesia, that mining company that operates a giant open pit mine that's the largest gold mine in the world, and you can see it from space. That company, with those huge holdings in Indonesia, one of their executives met in Indonesia with that same politician who we just saw with Donald Trump. And he secretly taped him. He secretly taped him trying to shake down the mining company for $4 billion. That mining company, Freeport, their contract to operate in Indonesia runs out in 2021, runs out in 4 years. They would very much like to extend that contract. They have a big new underground mine that they want to build there, too, along with their biggest gold mine in the world. And that politician, that Indonesian Speaker of the House, the guy who was standing there with Trump, who got introduced at that press conference, that politician was caught on tape telling the mining company that, yeah, he could get them an extension of their contract. In fact, he could get them a 20-year extension of their contract with the Indonesian government. They could get a deal to operate in that country until 2041. If they could provide him with a little something, they'd have to hand over 20% of the company. Shares worth roughly $4 billion. He said they could hand that over. What do we call it? An administrative fee? They'd have to hand that over through him. He would pass the money on to the president and vice president of Indonesia, and that is how Freeport could get their new contract with the government of Indonesia. It's a classic shakedown, right? And it was caught on tape. And the tape went public in Indonesia just a few weeks after Donald Trump inexplicably introduced this guy to the American press corps during the Republican primary in the lobby of Trump Tower when he was making that announcement about the stupid pledge. And here, we're all like, who's that guy? In Indonesia, that's one of the most powerful politicians in that huge country. And he's caught red-handed, and it's on tape, and the tape goes public. Huge scandal. The tapes were lurid. They were played over and over again in the Indonesian media. By December of that year, by December 2015, 3 months after he had that weird meeting with Trump that nobody understood, that guy, the Speaker of the House in Indonesia, forced to resign in the midst of this scandal. And then over the course of the ensuing year, things got even more wild than that. He was facing this ethics tribunal for this caught-on-tape corruption scandal. But then the tape itself got ruled inadmissible as evidence before the tribunal. And this guy was powerful enough and connected enough that even though he'd had to resign in disgrace, even though everybody heard the tape, right after our election in November, this past November, they actually returned this guy to power as Speaker of the House again. And now 2 things have happened that sort of make us understand our new world. Two things have happened that make this all make sense. Number one is that the Trump Organization has just confirmed to the New York Times that Donald Trump's new real estate deals, that golf course he wants to build, that resort he wants to build, the Indonesian resort deals that brought this politician to Trump Tower in the first place, Trump Organization's just confirmed to the New York Times, those deals are on. Those projects are moving forward. Remember when Donald Trump said right after he was elected that there would be no new deals by the Trump Organization? Now that he's president-elect, there are new deals that are absolutely underway. In West Java, that's the golf course, and in Bali, that's the hotel. Must be nice to have a very powerful politician like the country's Speaker of the House helping you out with real estate deals like that. And what does the Indonesian Speaker of the House get out of this deal? The man who was caught on tape trying to squeeze $4 billion out of that gigantic American mining company that's the largest taxpayer in his country. And that brings us to the final piece of this, which is apparently how it's going to work now in our country. We're used to reading about how stuff works like this with, autocratic leaders who've been in power for decades and their extended families who own more wealth than the rest of the country combined, right? Politicians who get caught for corruption in big foreign companies and how deals get done that help people with the right connections, right? I mean, we're used to reading about this in, terrible human rights reports on countries that end in stan. But now we get an American chapter of that particular story, because the last piece of this is that just as this Speaker of the House in Indonesia gets reinstated after his corruption charges get thrown out on a technicality, just as this Speaker of the House who's helping Donald Trump with his real estate deals gets put back in power, and just as those deals that will enrich the next American president personally, just as those real estate deals get turned back on in Indonesia, at the same time, our incoming president announces the newest member of his administration. A man who will serve without a formal job title and without a salary, and who will not be asked to give up or even disclose any of his own business contacts in order to take this new position. A man who has been consulted already on the head of the EPA, who is consulting now on picking the head of the SEC, who will apparently be in charge of reviewing all corporate regulations in the new administration, this new key member of the federal government for whom they have invented a job without a formal portfolio. He is the single largest shareholder in that mining company, whose mines in Indonesia you can see from space. The company that did not pay the $4 billion shakedown price to that politician who is personally helping Donald Trump get richer in Indonesia as president. And now that company will presumably be in an excellent position to do whatever needs to be done to benefit whoever needs to be benefited. You scratch my back, I scratch a giant hole in the earth that can be viewed from Mars. This is apparently what it's going to be like now. Everybody's got to pay attention now. I know it feels like time to not pay attention. We've all got to pay attention. A lot more ahead tonight. Stay with us.